All right, I will call the meeting to order of the Ross Valley School District. All participating staff, oh, I'm sorry, it is 6:34 p.m. On May 3rd, 2020. And, 2022. Sorry, 2022. May 3rd, 2022 at 6:34 p.m. All participating staff and trustees are here in person at the Ross Valley School District office, with the exception of Ryan O'Neill, who is not able to join us tonight. He's feeling ill, so cross our fingers for him. In addition to the in-person, as we all know, we are on air and being recorded. We are live and being recorded for the listening audience. And the meeting will be posted to our website in 72 hours of the meeting. So we all know about every little sound, paper and candy wrappers and whatnot are come across. Our first agenda item for tonight is closed session. And we have two items tonight on our closed session. We have a conference with legal counsel for anticipated litigation of significant exposure to litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956.9, subdivision D 2 or 3, special education program dispute. Student number 775-643-0602. We also have conference with real property negotiators for 119 Porteous Avenue.
199.
I'm sorry, 199 Porteous Avenue. All right, so we will move into. Oh, do we have any public comment on the closed? We don't have anybody in our audience, so we have no public comment. And we will then move into closed session. All right. Well, welcome back to our listeners. It is 7:34 and we are reconvening in open session. As is our normal protocol, before we move into our business, we say the Pledge of Allegiance and take a moment to think a little bit about why we say the Pledge of Allegiance and the democracy that we're all a part of. Tonight's moment of reflection before we say our pledge, I wanted to share some thoughts on being part of being in community. So communing with each other in unity, and that in democracy and in community, we share responsibility for each other and for the well-being of all, regardless of our differences. And that the strength of our nation and our county and our towns and our school district really depends on the vibrancy and the cohesiveness of that diversity in our community. And so in reflecting on community and why we spend a little bit of time thinking about that, and also thinking about celebrating and noting that diversity in our community, and that our students do that as well. And often during the month, our students think about differences in our community. And this month is Asian Pacific Islander month. And I know that our students and our teachers are all reading stories and looking at maps and watching films, and have had access to a lot of great resources to think about Asian Pacific Islander month. The proposed resolution, the reason why it's in May is that on May 7th, 1843 was the first Japanese immigrants arrived in the United States. 2 decades later, on May 10th, 1869, the Golden Spike was driven into the first transcontinental railroad, which was completed using Chinese labor. So then in 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed a joint resolution celebrating, recognizing the celebration on October 5th of 1978, which was then a signed proclamation by Barack Obama in 2009 for the entire month. So I just wanted that moment of reflection on community and why it is that I think it's important that we take a moment and think about what community and unity and strength means in our diversity. So, along those lines, let us say the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And our second procedural item is item C, number 2, adoption of the agenda and time allocations. I apologize for our board for being about a half an hour later starting than we normally do. Is there anyone else who has any other comments or adjustments to be made to the agenda or time allocations? Hearing none, then I will entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Motion and a second. Wesley?
Aye.
Rachel?
Aye.
Marie?
Aye.
And Shelley, aye. All right, on to item D, which is communications. And this is a report out from closed session. We took action on one item in closed session, which was to approve the proposed special education program dispute for student ID number 775-643-0602 on unanimous vote. That was the only action that was taken in closed session. We now are open to public comments on items that are not on the open session agenda. Tonight, we only have one person in the audience, so we will be looking to her to see if there are any comments. Otherwise, we'll continue to move along. So no public comment on items not on the open session agenda. So item number 3 is board announcements. Any board announcements? Again, this is different from committees and things like that, but are there any board announcements? Great, Rachel, you have an announcement?
I have a few, yeah. It's funny, Asian American Pacific Islander Month. I attended a speaker series earlier in April about the impact of COVID on AAPI students. And it was similar to the previous webinar that I had attended for them. There's a heavy emphasis on mental health impacts and stigma and recognizing that AAPI students may not present with trauma associated with COVID, similar to their white peers. And so it was just really informative, and there's a lot of information given about that, so it was really helpful. I also got to go to 2 of the White Hill Middle School Bye Bye Birdie performances, so that was fantastic, and kudos to everybody who's involved in pulling that off. And it's really great to see the kids up in action. And then on Saturday, I got to stop by the Manor Fair, and they had a great event. It was really lovely, and it was really well attended. And I just really appreciate all the work that goes into something of that scale. They did a great job. So that's all.
And yeah, Marie?
Yes, I too attended the White Hill Bye Bye Birdie, and so our kids and many kids in action. That was delightful. I also attended the parent education event last Wednesday, put together by Julia and team. It was around raising an anti-racist kid, and that was less attended than the first event, if I remember right. I can't remember. It seemed to me that the first one we had maybe like 70 people, and this time, at least on the parent side, were less of us. But even if we're less of us, there was a group of parents getting together. In one of the sessions that was definitely really, really meaningful, and it made me think how much I would like that to happen in person. Okay, Julia, because I think some of the depth of the conversation was just so important, so meaningful to me that I think we could have gone to the next level of holding each other hand. There was definitely some room for that in that group of 15 people. I sent you a little screenshot just to show you how it was very meaningful. So I want to say thank you to that, and that was definitely a confidential conversation, but that was really a good one. And thank you for organizing that. And I think definitely this is a sign that we are making progress, because I think there was definitely a sign of the struggle in our community between parents of different colors and finding the right way to talk about it. And we're struggling, and it was good to struggle together and to hear the voice of those parents. and having us, the white parents, listening and being respectful and emotional and learning. And so that was really a great event. I wish for more, and I wish for in person so that we can go to that level of pass a little bit that level of awkwardness and get into really something that would be more personal. Because I think it's hard to go to the next level without being in the same room. And I've done some work, I've done some of that work in my job, and I found that when you are in person, that's even more disturbing to have this conversation, and therefore it's more impactful. So I think next year, as we get out of the pandemic, we can have hopefully some of those events in person, which is great. We are practicing right now. Next year, a couple of them in person, I think, would be really delightful. I look forward to that. Great job. That's really super. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just going to echo actually both of what you said. I thought the Manor School, I keep wanting to call it Winter Fair, but it wasn't. They did an amazing pivot to spring fair, and I noticed that the snow people were repainted as otters in springtime, which was a wonderful pivot and still a great event in spring, even if it wasn't in winter. So that was great. And then also attending that event, the parent equity conversation event. And I really did appreciate the follow-up, the engagement follow-up.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to have in future board meetings some updates on the parent guardian equity task force and some of the work about having those conversations even more connected locally in school with school communities.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great combination of having some content, but then taking it into those deeper personal conversations. I appreciate that too. All right. Item D4, correspondence and communication of the board. We don't have any correspondence.
We actually did receive
one?
one. We have one. However, due to meetings this afternoon, we weren't able to get it up. And so it'll get up in time for the next board meeting.
Okay.
And it was around the yellow bus transportation.
Okay. So we have one correspondence that'll be posted for our next meeting, which is next week. So
Yes.
that's follow up there. All right. We will then move on to item E, which is presentation and action items. And our first presentation for tonight is recommended approval of AB 1200 disclosure for California School Employees Association, CSEA. Something we've had before on our agendas.
For other groups, yes.
For other groups.
And this will be Chris Carson.
So the AB 1200 is a document that we have to provide to the County Office of Education. And we have to provide it at least 10 days prior to the board taking action on this item. And this was done, actually it was done quite some time ago, back on March 21st. We were preparing for it. We just had some technical issues getting the final approval from CSEA. And so what this process is, it provides the County Office of Education the ability to take a look at what the agreement is in terms of our financial status and look at our multi-year projections and determine whether we can meet our budget requirements over the 3 years as we start to put those dollars into our budget. And so as we look at this, what we have is and I don't want to steal all of the thunder on it, but we have basically a Me Too agreement type of agreement where it's the same as what our VTA received back in January and what the management received back in confidential back in April. And so this is a 3% on schedule and a $3,000 off schedule bonus based upon the FTE for the staff. And so as we costed that out, we do show that we can afford this within our multi-year projections. And so it would be my recommendation that we approve this evening. And so I don't know if there's any other.
Is there any other questions? This is the same, it's the standard process that we've done with the other negotiating entities, and the review process is the standard for all of the. Any questions? No, we can then entertain
Yeah,
public
I
comment?
don't have any question. I make the motion to.
Oh, hold on a second.
Sorry.
Just want to confirm, no public comment. Okay, we don't have any public comment. Go ahead.
Can I make a motion
Yes.
to approve the AB 1200 disclosure for the CSEA Golden Hinde Chapter 719 as in the agenda?
Well, second.
We've got a motion and a second. So we'll do the vote.
Aye.
Marie? Wesley?
Aye.
Rachel?
Aye.
Shelley? Aye. So moved. On to item number E2, recommended approval of 2021 tentative agreement between the Ross Valley School District Board of Trustees and the California School Employees Association, CSEA. Sounds connected.
And this is me. So now that we know that the agreement is affordable, now this item is to actually approve the tentative agreement. We did reach a tentative agreement with CSEA on March 1st, 2022 to settle negotiations and reopeners for the current school year. And in addition to what Chris discussed related to the AB 1200, the other elements of the agreement are the health and welfare increase for the Kaiser employee only increase there. We also, because we're coming up against a problem with the salary schedule related to CSEA for minimum wage, what we ended up doing was collapsing range 1 into range 2. And that did, the total agreement is 3%, but it did cause a little bit more of a bump into the range 2 positions. We also agreed that there are numerous positions on our current salary schedule that are defunct. We don't use them anymore. We haven't had them in play in some cases since I arrived in the district. And so we agreed through negotiations to eliminate all non-current functioning in operation positions from the salary schedule. So that was another agreement we reached. And also we agreed to recognize Juneteenth as a holiday for all classified employees in working status, if they should be on Juneteenth, whatever day that is celebrated. So it's another holiday that is added to our current language. We have current language in the existing agreement, which discusses on if the holiday falls on a weekend and so on, then what day does the actual holiday get taken? And so that is our agreement with CSEA. I'm going to just double check it. Yes, and that is it. So that is the tentative agreement we have with them. And so tonight asking you to approve the tentative agreement with CSEA to complete negotiations for 21-22 school year. Any
Are there
questions?
any questions or clarifications from the board? No. And public comment? No public comment. All right. We can entertain a motion.
I'll move that we approve the tentative agreement as listed in the agenda.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second, so we'll vote. Rachel?
Aye.
Leslie?
Aye.
Marie?
Aye.
And Shelley? Aye. All right. On to item E3.
3.
Programs impacting the Ross Valley School District and the budget. And I believe we have a presentation for this item.
Yes.
We do. And thank you for the opportunity to discuss the programs impacting the Ross Valley School District. This is going to be a bit of a tag team on this. There's several of us that will be presenting, but what I wanted to discuss, I guess I need to turn this on. There we go. Is we'll be discussing these programs, the Universal Transitional Kindergarten, also known as UTK, Universal Meals for All, Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, which is also known as the ELOP, technology needs, and community funded status. And so first, discussing the Universal Transitional Kindergarten. This is what the actual implementation would look like. It's a staggered implementation schedule. Currently what we have is only students that have their 4th birthday between September 2nd and December 2nd are eligible for TK. And next year that'll be moved up from, the date will change from December 2nd to February 2nd. And then each year it will change based upon their date of birth, and you can see that for each of those the fiscal years there. So eventually by 25-26, it'll be fully implemented, so it will be one entire full grade level.
Mhm. All right, and if we can go back to that, I just want to say that we have been collecting new student registrations. And so at this time, we do know what our configuration of the transitional kindergarten program will look like for next year. And we'll be later this week emailing that out to all of the currently registered families as well as pending registrations, putting it up on our website and so on, so that any new families who will be moving into our area or who haven't yet even thought about registration, who are here already, will be able to look and see how it will operate. So based on registration for transitional kindergarten, Brookside will have a transitional kindergarten combination class as they do this year. Hidden Valley, because of the number of TK registrants, they will have a standalone transitional kindergarten class. Manor also will have a combination of TKK, and Wade Thomas, because of its registrations, will have a standalone TK class. And so what this got us to do too was to look at one of the processes that we have in the district is the opportunity through what's called the intra-district transfer process, or within district school transfers. So if you're a resident of Ross Valley and your home school, resident school is Brookside, as an example, and you wish to have your transitional kindergartner attend, let's say, Manners TK program, then that's a transfer within district schools of resident students. So when we take a look at the impact of the transitional kindergarten program and how it's going to operate next year, we also don't just take a look at a 1-year snapshot in time. We also project out what would that look like into future years. And so we have developed a separate intra or between school district schools process for next year. And that is that if there is a child who wishes to attend a school other than their resident school for transitional kindergarten, they can apply for a transfer. And if there's space, we will approve it, but it will only be approved for transitional kindergarten. And then when the student becomes kindergarten age, beginning in the 23-24 school year, they will go back to their school of residence. Unless, of course, they wish to apply for an intra-district transfer, in-district transfer between schools, to remain at that school where they were in transitional kindergarten, they are more than welcome to apply or reapply for kindergarten. And if it is approved for kindergarten, then it will fall within our current intra-district transfer process, where if it is approved, then it will be approved through the end of 5th grade for that child.
Okay.
Now, some families may choose, as an example, to apply for a transfer for TK and go there. They may not want to stay at that school. They may have moved to another school district or school attendance area, or they decide, oh, we don't want to go to our home school for kindergarten. We want to go to this other school. So they don't have to only apply in kindergarten for the school where they were approved in TK. So there are some flexibilities and some options that families have with that. But our reason for needing to look beyond just the TK year is that we don't know what the expansion of this transitional kindergarten is going to foreshadow or foresee in our school district when it comes to kindergarten through 5th grade enrollment. So we need to take a pause and be able to plan for that when those students roll up into the next grade. Because we need to be sure that if there are families who choose not, because you might remember, transitional kindergarten and kindergarten are optional for families. They do not have to send their children to school for those 2 grade levels. We are obligated to offer it, but we don't know. There may be families who choose not to start their child when they're age eligible for TK. And so we just need to get a sense of what the impact is going to be on our school district when we roll those students up into kindergarten. So we're looking at just a 1-year separate process. It will be included in the communication that we send out to families later this week, and will be posted on our website, and we'll actually have an acknowledgement in the application that the family acknowledges that if it is approved, it is only for that 1 year. And then they can apply again in kindergarten. So that's what we're looking at holding for next school year for transitional kindergarten. Now enrollment could change. We may end up with a whole bunch more new registrants, and we may end up needing to open yet a third TK class. So this is what we know as of now. And so we always plan accordingly, but it's also subject to change based on enrollment. So that's what we're looking at. Any questions so far about the expansion or what it's going to look like for next school year?
Yeah, question. So, so you have a rough idea of what's going to be at each school, TKK wise. Do you guys let the YMCA program know?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that, because that is something that happened last school year. We didn't know what our TK program would look like until right up before school started. And that was way too late of notice for our YMCA to communicate out to families, to plan, and so on. And so we made a commitment to not only ourselves, but also to our families and to the YMCA that we would make this determination as soon as possible so that there could be a lot of planning for families. And we think this will get easier over time as we go through the expansion until it is open and available to all children whose 4th birthday occurs by September 1. That'll be in the 2025-26 school year, because that'll be, as Chris mentioned, a full grade level added into our district. So we think by then we'll have it'll be just, we won't have to consider this when it's such a small bandwidth of students who have been so far eligible for TK. So thank you for mentioning that. Yes, but definitely let YMCA know.
And then for TK and K, I didn't have a TKK. I had a TKK. But do they get released at the same time, or do TKs
No,
get
our
earlier?
transitional kindergarten program is about 4 hours and 10 minutes a day currently. And so the kindergarten day, so they're on a shortened day, a lesser time day. Our kindergartners go to school for roughly 5.5 hours a day. Rough. Is it
And the
that long,
state
Julia?
mandates 180 minutes for TK, so we're well above the number of minutes.
Yeah, and kindergarten is a longer day. We're on an extended day for kindergartners. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions about TK next year? Good
Yeah.
questions. Yeah.
There are other slides, so let's go through the other one. Yes, I can see there is some more content. Yeah.
So in terms of impacts upon the district and our budget overall, universal transitional kindergarten impacts directly. We have to think about things in terms of if we are state aid funded and if we are community funded. As we move forward, we will be community funded
For next school
for
year.
next school year. And so the things that we need to be aware of is things like facility considerations will actually impact us regardless. As we start to grow in that grade level. But we also have other areas that things like teacher credentialing requirements for TK, which will impact us regardless of the funding status. And there's another thing that is regardless, which is the plan for implementation. We have to have a plan to the governing board by June 30th, which would be just how are we going to unfurl this. It does not need to be approved by the board, it just needs to be presented. So I wanted to point that out. But then as you start to look at the other areas on here, you'll see a lot of red. And the reason I've put the red on there is just to point out that as we move into community funded status for next year, we will not receive any additional revenues for new students in TK because our property tax base will be greater than the revenues we would receive for those students. It changes from year to year potentially, but we won't receive any additional monies. And that's important to understand for both the impacts on the revenues, but also the impacts upon on the staffing side of it. And the reason for that is because under the UTK program, they do have requirements that say 12-1 for student to adult ratios in 22-23, and then 10-1 for those same ratios in 23-24. And those may not necessarily be implemented fully if we go into community funded status, because it does have negative impacts upon the district. we feel strongly that the UTK program is a valuable program to the community. And so we are putting it out and offering it. I do know that there are other districts that are community funded status because they're not receiving any additional revenues. They won't be offering it. But Marcy and the district have taken the position that it is a valuable service to the community and is valuable for the children of the Ross Valley School District.
And if I can add, in the governor's proposal around implementation of universal TK, the dollars have been set aside. They have fully been set aside for every single district in the state of California. They're just, as of right now, there's no mechanism
Exactly.
to get those dollars into community funded status districts. We have emailed and provided letters to, and I've talked with local legislators as well as sent something to Governor Newsom. And so it's not a done deal that it won't be approved. It doesn't look likely. But it is this time is we have to plan as if we will not be getting those additional dollars. And this next slide I think is really pertinent in terms of the impact without that additional funding on our district's budget.
And this particular slide, we did provide to the governing board and to the public back at our second interim.
Yeah.
And so the estimates were at that time based upon the students that we were estimating to receive. And as you look at it, what you will notice is that we're calling it lost revenues. And the reason we're calling it lost revenues is because we would not be receiving those dollars. But should we be in state aid funding status, we would actually receive these additional revenues. And so in 22-23, it would be almost $600,000. And then by 24-25, it would be up over $1 million. And so those are significant dollars that the governor has within the budget set aside for the community funded districts. But unfortunately, as Marcy had pointed out, there's no mechanism to get those dollars to us.
And even in some of the articles I've read, it was interesting that the state suggests that districts just cut elsewhere. So in order to ensure that this mandate occurs, is they suggest cutting from other grade levels, other classes that are offered, and those kinds of things. And so for us, we take a K-8 approach, a TK-8. Because that is the grade level of students that we serve in our district. And so we don't just take a look at what's good for one grade level, we take a look at what is good for all of our students in our school district. And so for us, as we're in community funded status, we just will not be able to, with the amount of dollars that we'll receive, to completely implement the state's plan. Until we have at least a lot more time to look at our budget over time and make a determination as to what might we do without. As you all know from our previous board agenda items in which Chris has presented the district's budget, we do have a structural deficit. And so we are needing to be mindful about ensuring that we don't increase that structural deficit as we go forward.
And to kind of dovetail on what Marcy was just speaking about in terms of having to cut other programs in the classroom. If you look at our budget, we have requirements under the Form CEA and certain education codes that we spend. With us being an elementary school district, 60% of our budget in the classroom for teacher salaries and for instructional aid salaries and benefits. And so by default, we're required to do those things. And so the community funded districts have been doing that all along. And so as they put in these new requirements for new grades, you by default are going to have to take those dollars out of other programs. So it makes it really difficult, which is why even more so now than previously with us adding a full grade level, it's important for school districts to really make sure our local legislators and the state legislators know so that they can really create that mechanism for districts like us to get those revenues.
Hopefully they will find a way between now and earlier than 24-25, finding a mechanism for districts like ours to receive those funding, right? I have a question, Marcy, about the ratio student to adult. When you have a TKK class, is the 12 to 1 applicable to that TKK, or how do you make it work in a combo class?
We will not be implementing that.
Okay.
And so the maximum class size for transitional kindergarten and kindergarten are 24. We have a negotiated agreement with our teachers union that in a combination class, we will be 2 below the class size max. So in a
Got it.
TKK combination, as an example, our maximum class size would be 22.
Okay.
Under if you can go back to the previous slide, Chris, under what the state is asking for is a 12 to 1 student to adult. It doesn't mean 12 students to 1 teacher.
Yeah,
It means student to adult. So
Yes.
it could be an instructional aide or so on.
Yeah.
And what the state is saying is that it has to be for the entire time of transitional kindergarten. So if we go forward then into the 22-20 school year, that would be an increase. We right now provide an hour of aid time a day for all of our TK and K classes. And so that's what we currently provide. That's our structure within our instructional aid. So if we add any additional aid time, that is where on that next slide that Chris showed, it shows the cost in 22-23 if we do implement, and that will be the up to $600,000 for implementation of the UTK program as outlined by the state. And so we just do not have the ability to offer that, knowing what we're going to see later in the presentation is when we go into community funded status next year, the following years, you'll remember, we have to give in lieu property taxes to Ross Valley Charter for all of the Ross Valley resident students. And so when we look at the amount we'll be getting more in the property taxes, plus the amounts that we begin to lose in special taxes, as well as the in lieu property taxes, we're not getting any additional money. And so some districts that are in community funded status have a lot more money than we do. And as Chris mentioned, they because they won't be receiving any of these additional funds, they're not required to implement the program. We feel that it's positive and beneficial to kids, but we need more time than what's been allotted to make a determination as to how will we implement our TK program when we're in community funded status and won't have those additional dollars. That's why they're critical to us. And we're hoping the state does put in place the mechanism to allow community funded districts to receive these dollars that have been set aside in the state budget. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
I also wanted to note, just before we move on to meals, that one of the reasons that the state is moving forward on this, and the reason that our district is supporting this, and I think I mentioned it before, is an equity issue in terms of access to education and the long-term impact on student outcomes and readiness for learning. And it really helps students who wouldn't normally have access to that readiness experience. So I very much support our district seeing this as a holistic part of the students' learning, and will, I believe, go a long way towards closing educational equity gaps. So appreciate that. Any other, move on to meals?
Now we need to feed those kids, right?
Okay, so the next action, I don't know what's happening, it's skipping as well. Universal Meals for All is our next one. And so with the Universal Meals for All, there is no waiver for this program. And I know of districts, even in this county, that despite there being no waiver for the program, simply are going to be ignoring it and will not be implementing it. That is not the position that the Ross Valley School District is taking on it. And so we will be providing a breakfast and a lunch for all children, and it is free of cost to the parents. And what we will do is the parents will still have to order for the children, but rather than having to pay, they will just make the selection and it will be paid by the district. And so that's really critical. And so in terms of the process, we'll be going through that process to set up our breakfast program through the state, and we'll be working to get an amended contract with our provider for breakfast specifically, which is something that we need to do.
And this is a program that is funded even though we will be in community funded status next year.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's actually funded in a different fund altogether and through different sets of dollars. And so it doesn't impact our community funded status in any way, shape, or form. But with that, there are additional things that we need to be aware of. And so we will be working with our provider on the contract. We need to get a contract specifically for breakfast. So we'll be setting up that contract also with CDE and specifically for breakfast.
Yeah.
And looking at it currently in the current fiscal year, our lunch program has a participation rate of 7.57%, which means of every 100 kids, roughly 7.5% of them will get a meal from us each day. Now, that is currently when we have meals that are both free and reduced as well as paid. And so as we move forward into a free structure, we do expect those numbers to go up. And right now, it's a shot in the dark, but this is what we're estimating, 30% for lunch and roughly 10% for breakfast. Now, I don't know exactly what those numbers are going to be because we've never had this level of program in the Ross Valley School District.
Mhm.
You may have parents that, despite being offered a free meal, still will want to make sure that their kids have the meal that they want, that the parents provide. And so that will happen, but you will also have a large number of parents that will say, you know what, if you're going to give us a free meal, we'll go ahead and take it. And so where that really plays out, I think it'll be important for us to come back and revisit that, probably a little bit next year,
Yeah.
just so we can see as a governing board, what does that look like in administration. And so those are the percentages that we are looking at. Now, in terms of staffing, there are some things that we need to consider, and those considerations are related to breakfast primarily, and because right now we do not have a breakfast program, and so we would need to have at least one staff member for approximately 30 minutes a day for the breakfast time. We're looking at how that would be done. We might be able to do something a little bit after school starts with the break times. So that's something that we'll be exploring, but it also might be 15, 20 minutes before the start of school where they get their food. And so that will have play a factor on us. But as we look at that, the thing that's really important to note is that we currently have 5 positions throughout the district for the lunch program. Of the 5 positions, not a single one of them is filled. And so each and every day, my staff will head out and help serve meals, as well as have staff at the school sites help with the meal service. And so one thing that you'll note that I've added on here is that this isn't unique to the Ross Valley School District. If you look at the staffing shortages in Marin County, our unemployment rate is 2.45% in March, or 2.4%.
Yeah.
And that just came out and was in the Marin IJ. If you compare that against the state, which is 4.9, it's less than half of it. So we're the second lowest in the state, and another county here locally is slightly better than us in terms of a lower percentage. But what that means is that we're pretty much fully employed, and so it's difficult to get parents or community members to do the work. And so we might have 5 positions open, but it might be my staff and I out serving breakfast and lunch as we move forward. The other thing that's important to note is that we do have the additional staff time in terms of cost, and we're estimating that at about $12,600 for the year, which is not a real large figure. But then the other thing that is also important to note is we also have other types of supply expenses related to this. if somebody orders a meal and doesn't pick it up, the district will still have to pay for it. And so those will be real expenses to us moving forward. We also are finding it very difficult to get trays from our vendor and for us to find them. And they're starting to become very expensive. And something is as simple as labels on printed labels from the vendor, which normally would be 3 cents. They're talking about charging us 26 cents for them next year per label. And so those start to eat into our costs and add additional costs to the district. So those are things that we need to be aware of, and we're estimating that right now at roughly $50,000. But those are subject to change. If our participation rates go up significantly, we could see that begin to go up significantly as well.
Quick question, Shelley. Are we reimbursed? How does the revenue side work for the Universal Meal Program?
So we will still have to collect meal applications from parents. So if you are considered free or reduced, we would still get those dollars through the federal government and through the state. And those are part of the normal National School Lunch Program. The other part of that is with the governor's new program, we will receive additional dollars through the state, which will fund that other side for the meals that would traditionally be paid by the parents.
Yeah.
So that will also be paid by the state. Again, it will come out of non-Prop 98 and non-general fund side of the budget.
And maybe
Specific.
another way of asking it, is the Universal Meals for All, will it be fully funded?
It will be. Well, if we increase our costs, no, because they won't be paying for meals that we end up having to, where people order them and don't pick them up. So those types of things we won't get paid for, but it will be relatively similar to what we have right now.
Okay.
So they will be paying for the equivalent of what would have been received previously.
Thank you.
So it seems like there's also an additional communications cost with really helping people understanding about registering. They can't just show up and get food, get a meal. And the idea that if you order something, it's gonna cost the district and that you need to, it's not a kind of a loose drop-in deal. It's still very structured, even if
actually
it's not costing somebody. And lots of times when people don't pay for something, they're not quite as diligent about it being structured, so.
And actually, my staff and I were talking about that very subject today, that we'll have to make sure that we get out in front of that and communicate that routinely. I will say that right now, parents and students are generally pretty good about picking up their meals.
Great.
Generally, the ones that don't get picked up, it's because the child is out for the day. So it doesn't happen often, and it is a small percentage, but
Let's hope it remain the same, right? Yeah.
Great.
But again, we will be paying for those.
Thank you.
ELOP.
And so the next topic is our Expanded Learning Opportunities Program.
Not to be confused with Extended Learning Opportunities Plan that you approved last June for use of COVID one-time dollars. This is something very different.
Thank you for that clarification.
One of the things I want to point out is that this was a new program that was kind of thrown on and thrust on districts for the current fiscal year initially. And what happened is in July, we received word from the state that the governor put this in the budget. What they didn't do is provide us any information in terms of the revenues or how to roll this out. And so it was really difficult. And what they were getting was a lot of complaints from districts. How do we implement this? How do we implement this? We don't have any information. If I don't know how much money I'm going to get, how do I know I can afford it? Those types of things. Now they have pushed it back, and they recognized that districts weren't given sufficient information, sufficient time. However, I do want to point out that they're still working out the details of it. as recently as February, we were getting some new information, and we just started receiving information on what our funding will look like. And right now, they're showing those dollars to be $342,000 roughly. What I do want to point out is that this would be a program that would be a 9-hour day. And so it would be extending the day after school, but also it would include some form of intersession, also a 9-hour day for up to 30 days. And as you start to cost those things out, they become pretty cost prohibitive, especially for a district like us that's only receiving the $342,000. It may sound like a lot of money, but this would be for children that are in TK through 6th grade. So as you look at it, that's at all 5 of our schools, including White Hill Middle,
It's nothing.
because we have 6th grade at White Hill. And so it becomes pretty difficult to offer those programs. We are working with community partners, and I think we did talk about that in terms of looking at the YMCA as a potential partner. But there will be more to come on this as we move forward. And so that's really what we have in terms of the ELO program, the LOP program.
So in terms of implementation in 22-23, we will not, because there just isn't enough information out there as to what it looks like. But we're working toward it for implementation in 23-24.
Okay.
Technology.
So the next is technology.
So, everybody, shifting gears a little out of the realm of programs and moving into something just as crucial. I want to talk briefly about our technology needs for this year, and in working to understand why, we all know why technology is so important, especially after the past 2 years we've had where every home was sort of converted into a classroom for the use of technology. It's important to look at the instructional core model here, where we have educators, content, and learners. The Brookings Institute put together a fantastic report called Realizing the Promise, How Can Educational Technology Improve Learning for All? They identified 4 key areas with promising or emerging evidence. The first being number 1 in the lower left-hand corner, where we scale up standardized instruction, similar how we enabled distance learning during shelter in place and for students who opted to stay at home. It allows for virtual field trips, content specialists to engage students in classroom with distance education or pre-recorded lessons. And it also allows for collaborative opportunities where students learn to help each other. The second factor that they identified was the ability to facilitate differentiated instruction with technology. We all know students learn best when the content isn't so challenging that it's intimidating, or so easy that they're bored and distracted. So with the help of technology, we can help target them at that right level and keep them engaged. It also allows teachers to meet students where they are and provide targeted instruction through formative assessment with adaptive tools. Moving on to the expanding opportunities for students to practice. We know that students learn best by practicing concepts learned in class, and technology can help facilitate those opportunities. Last but not least in this study, they focused on the ability for technology to increase student engagement, where we've seen interactive videos and games as well as collaborative tools help engage students on an entirely different level. Next slide, please. In addition to what we see in the classroom, we've also become heavily dependent upon technology for our state assessments. We are starting our first week right now at the manner of our CAP testing. It's going very well, but it's all dependent upon students being on devices and connecting to the state and keeping track of where they are throughout the test. We also do, so we do that for ELA and mathematics assessments, and then we also do it for the California Science Test, the CAS test in grades 5 and 8. In addition to that, we do our English language proficiency assessments called LPAC. The initial and summative tests are all performed on computers as well. That being said, we are coming to the end of life for our largest quantity of Chromebooks that we have from Brookside to Whitehill in all of our classrooms. We're needing to sort of phase out 700 devices that have basically been in use for the past, we're looking at about 8 years now, that specific device has been in use. Chromebooks are our preferred in-classroom technology because of the fact that they are affordable, they can do what students need to do on them, and we get 8 years out of them, which would be hard pressed to do with most other devices. So what we're looking at here are an overview of the various models of devices, the numbers that we have in carts throughout our district, the expiration, because what Google does is from the minute they go on the market, 8 years from that date, they basically say, we're no longer going to support this product. So they stop releasing security updates, they stop releasing feature updates. Where that comes into play is on that prior slide where we talk about state testing. State testing needs to be done in a secure environment, and they need those secure environments to run on the latest operating systems. So we've been able to eke out an extra year right now, because we're testing in 2022, and the devices, 700 of the devices we're using expired June 2021. So that will not fly next year, and what we're going to need to do is replenish that supply so that we can test with those next year as we move on to 2023. I think we're good on
So
this.
Sean, here, those 700, the oldest one are really 8 years old.
Yes, they are. And they
I'm just
still,
pausing here because in my house, the Chromebook has a life of like 3 years. I'm just amazed.
yeah,
And I'm hearing different numbers from other organizations I'm aware of. So 8 years. Okay, good to know.
yeah, we've been lucky to get 8 years. And what we're
Wow.
doing every time we purchase a new model, we make sure to buy, it's an unfortunate way to have to do it, but we make sure to buy the newest model we can so that we get the full 8 years out of every, let's say $300 we invest in a device. So it means we have a varied number of models, and when we have to do repairs, it's a little trickier because we don't all have one model, but it's worked out thus far. And it allows us to sort of, as you can see, sort of spread out the need to replenish and refresh our devices because we can sort of spread out when those expiration dates.
Okay, now we need to talk then. Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify, which I think is
8 years.
a very helpful, important clarification, the major shift in district and school technology planning is the testing is now digital, and which requires a computer, and not only requires a computer, but as you mentioned, the safety and security requires the replacement planning. So just clarifying for us and for anyone else who might be listening that this is not like we've shifted out of the optional nice to have, let's do it on our own timeline as we would choose to, okay, we're now having to do this because of this statewide shift to digital.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
So that takes us to the next slide where Chris, I'll probably let you take over from here.
So as you can see, we have a lot of technology and a lot of devices that we do need to begin to think about how we, how we will replace those devices moving forward. And so one of the ways that we could do it, you can go and just spend all of your money on the devices in 1 year for roughly 700 of them, because that was the number that we needed to replace right now.
Yeah.
Or you can look to do some form of what they would call a lease. And the old terminology would be an operating or a capital lease, where the differences between the two is when you're just at the end of the lease, you return the device. That would be what it would have been considered an operating lease. And or you can pay a little bit more and actually keep the devices beyond the amount of the term of the lease and keep them for 8 years. And that would have been considered a capital lease. And so really, as we look at those things, what I would recommend as we move forward is to look at a lease where we keep those devices longer. These would be 3-year leases so that we can start to replenish our devices quicker. But also we do get to keep them for some time because they do have a longer life that we can maintain, provided they've been well loved by our classrooms. Doesn't always happen, but And so what we did is we looked at a couple of different options, and what we have shown up here is what the lease costs would be. So if we look at it, it would be $7,792 per month for the 700 devices, and also 23 carts that would be needed for those as well. And so that would be roughly $94,000 per year. And I know that we do have some of those dollars set aside as part of our COVID funds, but then moving forward, it is something that we do need to really think about building into our budget so that we have that plan with technology, as you were mentioning earlier, Shelley, with testing now being part of that equation, not just the education in the classroom. It's something that we have to replace. And so that would be our recommendation. And so the other alternative would be to go ahead and just make the full purchase at one time, which would be $272,000. And so if we were to go down the path of the lease for 3 years, it would cost us roughly $280,000. So spreading it out over a 3-year period, it's not a significant impact in terms of increased costs, but it does help you to be able to then start to plan and budget for those dollars more routinely, as opposed to coming up with a large sum all at once.
And if I can just ask, in terms of the number of Chromebooks we have, we're not a one-to-one student device district, correct? And so when you look at the total amount, is as on average, how many students per Chromebook are we looking at?
We are actually incredibly close to one.
We are? Great.
We are. In grades 3 through 5, we are. And then in grades 6 through 8, well, I would say we are there.
Okay, and that's fantastic. So that way classes do not have to share.
Correct.
And so that's really helpful. So when a teacher is ready to plan their lesson, their instructional program, and or the testing needs to occur, then the devices are available for the students. A few years ago, when the testing began to be digital, we were having to create schedules that were absolutely crazy in terms of how the devices would travel between the two schools and ship between the classes. And that just really wasn't a really best testing situation for the students and also for the classes, because it forced then, with having to get the full window of testing done across all 3rd through 8th grade classes, it could mean that one school is testing really early, more so than they would otherwise wish to do so, because they hadn't yet had the opportunity to cover the material that the students would be receiving throughout their school year. So this is great news. And for the amount, and knowing that it is basically a one-to-one program that we have, then knowing this total cost gives a closer idea of that's the total cost for the student program.
Going back one slide to what I have shown right now, you can actually see that we have 1,500 devices currently, and with roughly 1,750 children, and that's TK through 8th grade.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily need a device for every child at TK or K level. So,
But the cost that you have here, Chris, it's only for the 700. It will add. So starting next year, you will have to add the 162 and the 123, right? They will start getting on their own with them, right? As well.
yes, we will have to start to look at doing those as well.
Okay.
And so the reason that we've shown that is the very reason that you asked that question. Because it's not just the one.
No, it's all of them eventually.
Right.
You have to go through rotation, right?
And as far as the budgeting and approval process, it gets just baked into the budgets. Again, as you said, the rolling budgets on the annual basis, these numbers, and then when we approve the budgets, we're in a sense approving the technology plans as part of that budget.
And thank you, Shelley, for saying that. I should have said that at the top of this agenda item. Is one of the reasons that we're doing this agenda item tonight is to give you all a sense
Ahead, right?
before the budget comes to you, so you know all of the programs, because that would have made for an extremely long presentation around the budget if we did tonight's presentation when you're actually having to consider the budget as well. So we wanted to give you an advance look at the what's impacting our budget.
Thank you.
Great. Very much appreciate that. And let's make sure that we get a link to the recording of this on the budget approval night so that all of you out in the audience there who are listening to this and are
What are
going to
they
be
talking
paying
about?
attention to our budget approval can do your homework ahead of time and listen to the recording of this before that.
But even before we get to our budget,
Yes.
at our next meeting, I'll be working with Marcy to be bringing forward a potential lease agreement
Okay.
on this, as well as what would be considered a piggyback bid.
Gotcha.
And the reason you would have to do a piggyback bid is because even though we're leasing this and you look at the dollar amount and it's $93,000, that's
Yeah.
under our bid limit, you have to take the total costs of everything we're purchasing and add it together over the 3-year period.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's
So
not the
commitment.
1 year. And so because of that, $272,000 is our total. And so that exceeds the bid limit. Without having a piggyback bid, we wouldn't be able to do that. And so there are bids. A piggyback bid is another public entity that has put out a bid, a public bid. And they've included language in there that allows for other public entities to utilize the same bid. And so by default, you're getting a publicly bid item. And so we'll be doing that as well.
Thank you.
I had a question for Sean. So 700 units is a lot to buy at once. Is there an advantage to getting them via a lease versus purchasing them? Is it easier to get that number of them?
It's the exact same.
Okay.
You go to the same provider
Okay.
and they would be helping us to get the lease actually. So we went and looked at 2 different methods and the easiest one is to just go directly to the provider.
And timing wise, it gave us a fantastic project to work on over the summer.
yeah.
Yeah, so.
You guys did a great job last year of getting the technology, or the last 2 years of getting the technology that students needed during COVID. So that was because I know that was a huge challenge for a lot of districts. So I wanted to just appreciate how on top of it you all have been both in the past and then going forward. So.
And also to keep in mind that we have a super lean technology department. We used to have 4 positions in the department and now we only have 3. And so as we're going through budget reductions, every time, as I've mentioned before, there's a position open, we take a look at, do we need to fill it? We did lay off positions, but as we needed to, we had to bring one of them back, but we didn't bring both of them back. And so with what, Sean, with what you are able to accomplish within your department to support all of our students and staff and families throughout the district, thank you. It's a lot.
Very much. Continuing on.
The next part of this, which is important for us to talk about as we start to go into our budget at the end of May, is our community funded status. And I know we've talked a great deal about it. But what I wanted to point out is that as we look at our budget, what's important to note is the difference between state aid funded and community funded. And it's, the way I think about it is kind of like a weight. And so when looking at your state aid side of this scale, you have the LCFF and COLA percent change. And so you have to look at what the increase is from the state on your attendance. And then the other part of that is to actually look at your attendance itself, the pluses and minuses, because that will have a direct impact upon your revenues. And then you have to compare all of those changes versus on the other side of the equation, your community funded status district. And for that, you have to look at what is your property tax revenue increase? What does that look like in terms of a percentage? Start to compare that against the COLA. You also have to look at your in lieu property taxes and also your supplemental taxes, because in year 2, when you are in community funded status, you lose your supplemental tax revenues and you have to begin paying out your in lieu property taxes. So those will negatively impact your revenues on the community funded side. And so it's important to note those things, and as we move forward, right now we have a 6.56% COLA that has been thrown out there by the state, which is different than what I had in the second interim. It keeps going up, and that shouldn't be surprising as we look at the cost of living in general. The consumer price index is going up, which is a major driver of that COLA. The other thing to note is we have, in terms of our funded average daily attendance, we will lose, under the current law, we will lose the ability to have the COVID hold harmless on our attendance. So we will no longer be having our ADA back from 1920. Our ADA will be based upon, if we're declining enrollment and attendance, it will be based upon the current year attendance, our P2 in the current year. And so when looking at that, it's over 15% drop. And so you then have to compare that versus what we are seeing in our property tax increases. And we keep getting increases in our property taxes as well, which is different than what I had shown at the P2. And we're up over 7%. So next year, we will be in community funded status and pretty firmly. That's important to note. The other thing that is important to note, and there's a note kind of off to the side on the left, we just want to make sure again to stress that as you're in state aid funded status, you continue to receive revenues for your new transitional kindergarten students, and you have the adult to student ratios that are part of the regulations. But as you move into community funded status, you no longer get the revenues for the TK students, and we probably will not be having those lower ratios.
Yeah, count.
So those are important things to note. Oops.
And also what drops in year 2. Did you already say that? Sorry, of community.
I did.
You
Yeah.
did, thank you, sorry.
But you just mentioned that we'll be, when we move into, we're still looking at teetering at least for a year, or that's still, we'll find, to be continued, we'll find out more next month.
Actually, it's a perfect segue for the next 2 slides.
Okay.
What is important for everybody to know is that there's a proposal on the table right now from the governor. All it is a proposal. In all likelihood, it will probably in some form be passed, but we can't look at that until it actually happens. So I'm having to basically create 2 budgets in terms of our revenues, one based upon the governor's proposal and one based upon current law. Current law, we would be continuing in community funded status for the duration. We would, even though we would lose the supplemental taxes and have to pay the in lieu property taxes, we would probably, based upon the information that we have right now, continue to be in community funded status. However, looking at the governor's proposal, which is on the right side, his proposal is to have the greater of your current year average daily attendance. So if you're going up in average daily attendance, you would get funded based upon that. Your prior year ADA if you're in decline, or your computed average for ADA using the prior 3 years. So it would be last year, or when I'm doing the revenues for next year, it would be the current year ADA and the 2 previous years. Well, when you look at those 2 previous years, those are going to include the COVID hold harmless ADA. So it won't show a full 15% reduction in our ADA until that 3rd year. Now, as we look at that, I think I have it here. And I don't have it in terms of dollars because the state did put out a LCFF calculator for us. Problem is there were some errors in it, and the county has gone back to them on that to see if they can get them to correct it. But as I understand the regulations, based upon everything that they've provided us, our current law would be, in terms of our funded ADA, would be the left numbers there, and you can see our ADA actually starts to drop pretty seriously. And so you would see between 21-22 and 22-23 that large drop in average daily attendance, which is that 15% reduction that I was telling you about earlier. You can kind of see that in the right-hand box. It's the first set of percentages to the left. However, as you start to look at the governor's proposed 3-year averaging, my ADA would go from 1666 roughly to 1867. Now, that is still a drop of roughly 100 ADA, and that it's still a large enough drop that based upon all of the revenue information that we have in terms of property taxes and the COLAs and everything, we would still stay in community funded status next year. And that's because we would not be losing our supplemental taxes nor our paying out the in lieu property taxes. However, as we start to look, and you can see the drop in funded ADA to the right, what it would look like, instead of being 15.32%, it would be 5.08, but then you would start to see the full impacts each year after that. And so we would bounce back into state aid funded in 23-24, more than likely. But then because we would no longer have to pay the in lieu property taxes or lose the supplemental taxes in 23-24, we would probably bounce back into community funded status. And then
Beginning what year?
in 23-24.
Okay.
And then by 24-25, which I don't show there, you would lose all of your COVID hold harmless within that 3-year average, and we would be back into maintaining our community funded status moving forward.
And at that point, then again, losing supplemental taxes
Yeah.
and
In
in lieu
year
property
2.
taxes. So, yeah, so the cycle.
It's
So
just delay.
That last line is 24-25.
The last line, yeah.
23-24.
No, I didn't include it. In 24-25, we would lose all of our hold harmless dollars.
But the last two both say
23,
24.
24, 25.
Oh my goodness.
You know, that's the following year,
It
that's
is.
the next year. You know what
It
I'm
is
saying? That
24-25.
yeah.
It is a 24.
I can't tell you how many times we looked at these, and there's still that.
No worries.
Well, what it does is that it smooths the cliff, right?
Yeah.
But for
Right.
us, it just kind of delays this whole like being committed, you know,
But
Yeah.
what
status.
But it's helpful to know, so basically, once the hold harmless rules out of effect,
Yeah.
assuming the governor's budget goes into effect,
Yeah.
then we sit in community funded status, we stop fluctuating.
Correct.
Yep.
Based upon our best information and projections at this time.
Yes. So today, 9 p.m.
Yeah.
8:50 p.m. as you know. Want to know? Yeah.
So that's
thank you.
really, it's important to note
Yeah.
those teetering things. It is, when you teeter back and forth, it means that you are going with the one that's the higher revenue, so it's more beneficial to the district in those years. But what makes it difficult is the one-time nature of some of those revenues, but also the cash flow issues. So it's just something we need to be aware of and really be thinking of and be thoughtful of in terms of our cash flows. So. And then the last thing that I wanted to discuss, so just kind of looking at everything we talked about this evening and just kind of put it in perspective in terms of our costs. Right now, we don't see an impact in terms of our staffing costs, both for certificated and classified based upon going into community funded status. So there would be no approximate cost to the budget. As we move forward into the universal meals, those would be negative impacts into the general fund for any excess above and beyond what we would receive in terms of revenues. And so it's roughly $62,000, $63,000. And then the technology, and I'm sorry, kind of got cut out, but it's approximately $93,500. And so total, it's an estimated cost of about $156,000. So as we start to look at those things. So there are impacts upon the district moving forward with these programs. And we just wanted to make sure that the governing board is fully aware of those. And with that, I know we were,
I think we asked a lot of questions
Yes.
during, so I think.
Are there any other clarification questions or questions
have
from
just
the
a-
board?
I have a general question. So 700 computers is a lot to replace in one shot. That's a lot. If there's like one massive issue with that level or that computer model, it's like that's 700 of them we've got. Is there any like plans or thoughts for maybe staggering when we replace some of those? So going forward, we're not like, because 93,000 that's to cover those 700, but then we're gonna need to work in all those other to make the 1,500. So are we gonna stagger that some of it so it's not all like one chunk and then like every like 8 years we got that huge hit?
If we were to stagger, we would be without the number of devices we needed next year for testing.
But if we went on a lease, could you maybe replace some of those sooner rather than later so that you're not short anything? Or would that, I'm just looking at like trying to minimize that
moving forward, actually, that's a great question, and that's part of the reason you go with a 3-year lease. Because that allows you to replenish those 700 over a different schedule. So we will be able to keep them for up to 8 years, but that doesn't mean that we have to wait the full 8 years. We could start to stagger them a little bit more. And so
Moving forward.
moving forward.
Moving
Yeah,
forward,
it'd be
yes.
the first time we've done an implementation that large and with some fantastic data to reflect it. In years.
Yeah.
Change it up.
Thank you.
And we can still use some of those devices potentially at the beginning of the year if not everything is fully rolled out right at the beginning. The testing happens in the spring, which is your most critical period. But so it does give you a little bit of a time.
So I'm gonna make sure we do public comment, but we don't have any public comment. So we don't have any public comment on this item.
It's just a discussion.
And it was just a
Ahead of,
discussion.
I do appreciate the idea of talking about that ahead of the budget. This way you can refer to it better. I think this is a good idea. I'm going to implement myself.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Moving on to item E number 4, which is the recommended approval of a contract extension and amendment for Chris Carson, Chief Business Officer, Chief Business Official.
And this is to extend Chris's contract. So he was initially hired on a 2-year contract, and that expires on June 30th, 2022. And I will say, and I think everybody will join me in saying that we are really, really, really lucky and super glad and happy that Chris decided to join Ross Valley School District. His knowledge, his capabilities, his ability to plan and foresee going forward what this district needs and to ensure that we're maintaining solvency as well as give us heads up. But his knowledge is something that I just haven't seen, and I'm so thankful, especially as a new superintendent. And so with that, the only change to his contract would be to extend it for the full length that you can legally, which is to 2026, June 30th, 2026.
And I want to add that being the lucky traveler to Sacramento in some CBO circles myself, I have met multiple people who have told me how lucky we are to have you here. So I want to echo that as well. You are known all across California, so we are definitely very lucky. I've heard a lot of good stories about you.
Yeah.
So yes, I want to make a motion to approve extension of the contract.
Do we need comments? Public comments?
I was gonna say, the only problem is that we can't continue to say good things by making a motion that quickly. And we do have to open it for public comment in case
Okay,
we have any. So hold that thought and
Okay.
I would like to make a comment.
please make a comment.
Thank you.
You can, I'm sure we can hear you from
We
there.
can hear you from
Yeah.
Okay, so I would just like to say, Chris, the other thing I really appreciate, and it's echo.
Name and,
Oh, I'm sorry, my name is Karen Tessitore. I am an 8th grade math teacher. I'm also the president of the RVTA union. And I would also like to say that you have a wonderful ability to clearly explain complex budget concepts. So really appreciate it for making that so clear for all of us. So thank you.
thank you. Any other, I was just gonna add a very similar, like your ability to do the detail of very complex, but then roll it up and put it in visuals around budgets and all of the considerations, and very thoughtful and fair-minded and balanced, and really help us make decisions with all the information that we need to make good decisions. So I appreciate that.
Would just be echoing what everyone else has already said. I think you're great. So just very thankful you're here.
And before we go forward, again, remembering that we are recording, Wesley had to depart us in the middle of the last item because his allergies were just really bad and he needed to take his leave of absence for. So he's no longer up here at the dais. But we remain to have quorum, so we can continue to move forward. Phew. Yes.
So therefore,
So
on
now,
that
on that note,
I would like to recommend approval of Mr. Chris Carson extension. Yeah, your contract. Please extend.
I will second that very happily.
we have a motion, a second. I would third that, but I can't. So we'll just go ahead and go ahead for the approval. Marie?
Aye.
And Rachel?
Aye.
And Shelley? Aye. Thank you very much. The next item is recommended approval of the declaration of need for fully qualified educators for the 22-23 school year.
And Julia Wolcott, in her role that she's taken on this year, adding some human resources duties and responsibilities to curriculum and instruction, will take this one.
I wasn't entirely prepared.
Oh, I can do it. Okay, all right. So
She's delegating. It's really good.
yeah, look at her, she did it. So this is just an annual requirement that districts, if they are thinking that they may not have fully credentialed teachers, meaning that they might need to be hired on a permit, like an intern permit or an emergency type of a permit, we must have what's called the Declaration of Need on file with the state of California. It does require board approval, and it must occur in an open presentation. It cannot be on a consent agenda. And so in the event that we have a teacher, as an example, who comes out of state, and a lot of other states' credential requirements are not compatible with California. And a lot of other states do not require English learner authorization, but California does. And so in order for us to have a new teacher into our district without English language learner authorization, we must have this declaration of need on file. Or we cannot apply for the permit that will give that teacher the time to get that English learner authorization. So that's one example. We may have a critical need where, and we know that we're in a teacher shortage, and so some positions are extremely hard to fill. As we're reaching out to university programs or other programs that are educating future teachers, we might have to take somebody who is an intern into our school district. And again, we must have this on file. And so what's before you tonight is to approve the declaration of need for the 22-23 school year. And each of the positions that we anticipate or possibly would need to apply for a permit with the state, we have listed on the declaration of need. And this way we don't have to bring it back to you if we have some realization later on in the school year, or as we get closer to a school year and we have, let's say, a resignation. We anticipate everything because we wouldn't be able to apply for the position until you had approved a revision to the declaration of need. So we have covered all bases here. And so with that, any questions or?
No question.
No questions? Do we have any public? We know no public comment. Is there any other? Nope. All right. So with that,
I will make a motion that we approve the declaration of need for fully qualified educators for 22-23 school year.
great. So Rachel has made a motion,
And I second.
and Marie's got a second. So Rachel?
Aye.
Emery?
Aye.
And Shelley, aye. Thank you. We are then on to recommended approval of resolution 08-21-22, proposing an election, which is requesting the Board of Supervisors to consolidate with any other election conducted November 8th of 2020, and requesting election services by the Marin County Elections Department.
2022.
What did I say?
Did it again. 2020.
2020,
2 years
okay.
ago.
I'm behind by 2 years tonight. 2022.
Great. And so, as we all know, 2 of our trustees' term will be ending. And in order to have an election to replace our 2 trustees and or if any of them continue to run, but to have that election, we need to have the item placed on the agenda. And so because this is also rather than having a standalone election, this would be allowing our Board of Trustee elections to be integrated into the other elections that will occur on November 8th, 2022. And this will actually save the district money, because when you go out to do your own standalone election, it costs a lot more money than it would if you're integrated with other items on the ballot. So that's what's here before you this evening.
Any board questions on that process? It's very
No
standard.
question, it's, yes, exactly, it's standard and it's a no-brainer.
Okay.
But I want to make sure.
No public comment on the item as well. Procedural item here for us to make sure we are accomplishing.
I will move that we approve the resolution 0821-22 requesting the Marin County Board of Supervisors consolidate the election of 2 Ross Valley School Board trustees with all other elections throughout the county to be conducted on November 8th, 2022 general election.
That thing.
And
And I second.
And a
It's
second
long
by-
sentence, yes.
yes. All right, so motion and a second. Then Rachel,
Aye.
Shelley, I, and Marie.
Aye.
All right, we have that pass. We are now on to item number F, consent actions, and we only have one item on consent for this evening. Is there any questions or conversation by the board? Nope. All right. No public comment? All right.
And I move that we approve the personnel actions as presented.
Yeah, and I second.
Motion and a
Thank
second. Rachel?
Aye.
Marie?
Aye.
Shelley, aye. And then on to board business, item number G. Committee updates, reports from trustees. Were there any committee meetings?
No, I didn't attend. There was none of my committees.
None of your committees?
No. I think all of mine met almost,
All
except
of
for
yours.
one. Yeah. So I went to the Safe Routes to School meeting. They talked about their spring encouragement campaign that they're doing. They have a new website, so that's a lot easier and it's prettier. It's easier to get around. There's a language translation widget that they mentioned. And then they're doing their Jedi challenge right now. May 4th is their big walk and roll day. So that's big. They're pushing that really heavily at the schools. And you might actually see some of the posters that were done. There's like a cute little one of like the Mandalorian and the baby Yoda thing. But it was done by a White Hill student, which is, there's 2 of them, but I've only seen the one so far. And they talked a little bit about the crossing guards and how that program is run through TAM and it's up for renewal. And that kind of assigns where the crossing guards are in our communities. And they do a study where there's like 3 different parameters they look at to decide which intersections get crossing guards. So if you're, they're looking at like what the actual speed limits are. They're looking at how busy the areas are, how many kids are crossing them. So they're looking at various factors that would need to have extra safety on them. There are some town issues and updates that were given about, just things that like narrow streets where there's cars, and they're saying perhaps maybe we should not have cars parked there at certain hours of the day for drop off. And they said that they're actually doing that and leaving it narrow intentionally for slowing traffic so that people aren't speeding near schools. So they said, that's actually a speed deterrent that they're not going to fix, which I thought was kind of interesting. I just hadn't heard that approach before, but it makes a lot of sense. There is some talk about the bus service, which is also run by MTA. And they did a parent survey talking about planning for future services, and they're going to move forward doing that every year to kind of just get a feel for how many buses they'll need and where they'll need to be serving. They said that the public transit bus at White Hill is still fairly crowded, but they haven't been receiving complaints in the afternoons anymore. So I don't know whatever mitigation strategies the school has implemented, but I think this must have been helping. The San Anselmo Butterfield Safety Committee is working on some projects. If you go down that way, you'll see that there's a lot of new slurry seal, green paint, and they're talking about potential widening areas of certain parts. And they're looking at doing some kind of crosswalk over by the Sleepy Hollow Pool Association. And then they're looking at their travel plans and goals for going forward. And I guess every 5 or 10 years, they look at this whole plan they have for travel and safety in the entire county and kind of go over the whole thing and update it. And it hasn't been done in a while. So they're looking at doing that now. So that was all of my safe routes to schools. I attended the Racial Equity Parent Task Force meeting, as several of us were there. So I'll keep that brief. We kind of just went over experiences and sharing and solving and kind of how to do that and group kind of collaboration on that. Went over the task force's role and purpose a little bit and shared some expectations, and then kind of went over discussing effective ways for parents and staff to engage on equity at the school sites. And then we broke into school groups and kind of discussed things in that and how to kind of improve things at the different school sites and what has been going on. And we heard some great stuff from some of the schools, and it was interesting because you could see the collaboration happening like in real time when it was like, hey, I wanted to talk about that project that you just did. That sounds amazing. Why don't we try that at our school now? So it was great to see that happening. And then we got a really quick update on SHORE, Standing Up for Racial Equity. It's a new parent group, so we heard a little bit about that. And then I went to the YES meeting/media retreat. And it was the first time that group the YES board has met in person since the pandemic. So I met several faces I'd just seen on the computer screen. So that was great. We got a fundraising update. The participation challenge for the spring just ended. They do a fall one, which is just, hey, we're trying to hit our goal. And then in the spring, it's just, we want any family in our district to participate at any level that they can. And so it was just participation focused. And as of May 1st, they're at 838,000, which is 94% of their overall goal for the school year. So they're hoping to get to 100% by the end of June when we're done at school. And it's getting there, so it's much improved over last year, but it's been a slow climb out since the pandemic. Theater just wrapped up for the year. It was a big push to get the last production done, and they are actually setting up a committee because it is a big project to manage the theater. And so that committee is being set up. And then they were talking about marketing and social media as a way to help kind of encourage people to understand what YES is and the difference between what YES and the PTOs do, because that always comes up, the difference between what YES provides and the school districts and the school district and the PTOs and PTOs provide. And then the board for YES is rolling over with the new school year. So they were talking about, people who might be interested in joining the YES board, and if they had certain areas of interests. They are also talking about, instead of, if people don't have the time to commit to being just a board member, that they could maybe work on one of the committees that they're trying to set up. So they could, hey, I can help at XY time and I can help for a certain amount. And it's not like a huge year-long commitment, but they can maybe help on certain projects. And so they're looking at flexible ways to get more community involvement from families at different schools. And then they just kind of, because, some people might be outgoing, they have kids who are graduating out. They said, they asked all of us for information on our roles and what we do and what could be done to improve efficiency or suggestions for new roles. So that was the YES mini retreat in person. And done.
Okay. I also attended the Parent Guardian Equity Task Force meeting, which is definitely a balance of personal, having some personal connections with everyone in terms of their personal experiences in our school. And I find that it's helpful to hear the personal experiences of all different kinds of people's personal experiences in our school, coupled with the action plan, the racial equity action plan, which is very much of that solution space that you mentioned, and action planning and working towards that. Definitely seeing the focus on getting it into the classroom, getting it at the school sites. I thought the conversation around the role conversation around bringing racial equity conversations and action to all of the different parent groups and how to go about doing that so that it's not seen as something that's in addition to or separate from, but embedded not only in the classroom, but in PTAs, PTOs, site councils, DLAC, ELAC, site-based language learner. So I thought that part of the conversation was great to see how it kind of goes across, and then also having the time to work on a site level as well and reinforce that, which I think has been an evolution for the sites. And all of the sites came back with some, report out information from the last meeting. So again, it felt like there was some momentum of the group coming together, going out, action and activity taking place at each site, and then coming back together to share what was happening at each site. So good. And that's all I have to report. Thank you. So now we are on to approval of the meeting minutes for April 12th. All of us were here and we have quorum, so we can go ahead and approve them even though Ryan and Wesley are not here because we do have quorums.
Yeah. I would then make a motion to approve the minutes from the April 12th meeting.
I will second it.
All right, and we'll take a vote since we can all vote. Motion and second. So Marie?
Aye.
And Rachel?
Aye.
And Shelley? Aye. Great. Minutes are approved, and we'll go on to the superintendent and cabinet report.
All right, and we'll start off this evening. Chris Carson, anything from the business services department?
Just that we, last week, we actually had our financial auditors out and they were going through our financial statements just from the preliminary audit. And so it's an opportunity for us to showcase everything that we're doing in the district, not just in my area, but also out at the schools in terms of attendance and those types of things. And so I just wanted to let the governing board know that we were already starting that process. They were out for a couple of days, and we look forward to working with them as we move forward into September with the actual closing of our books and have them do our financial audit. So it's a way for us to really showcase all of the wonderful things we do as a district.
Thank you. And Julie, anything from curriculum and instruction or human resources?
Yes. So with regards to curriculum, we've started doing some professional development planning for next year and really looking at our district initiatives and how we want to move forward. And this process begins with Delight, our teacher leadership group, meeting with our full administrative team. And what we did was we looked at some of our current initiatives as well as potential initiatives and looked at each one of those through two different lenses, one being our racial equity lens and the other one being our MTSS, multi-tiered system of supports lens, both of which are really about supporting all of our kids. And so really trying to there's a lot that we can do, and of course we can't do all of it because you water it down and you don't really have the kind of success that you want. So really great first layer of conversations, and then in a couple of weeks the same group is meeting again to flesh it out a little bit further and do some prioritizing. So that's an exciting process. It's something that I really always enjoy. I've been having fun visiting math classrooms around the district, preparing for next week's presentation, which is on mathematics, one of my very favorite topics, so I'm looking forward to that. And CASP testing is underway. Huge shout out to Sean, who's really done pretty much all of it, along with his team. And we've started at Manor and things are going really beautifully smoothly, so that's great. We also had some PD that's been happening now. We had a math release day last week, which was a kind of a part two to some work that we're doing. Our math department is reading a book called Building Thinking Classrooms, and it's a fantastic book. It has a lot of really good concrete suggestions, and some of that is what you'll learn about next week in our math presentation. And Karen has agreed to, Karen Tessitore, our math department head, has agreed to help me out with that presentation. So thank you for that.
I'm not the head anymore.
Oh, sorry, good point.
She's in the
Former
public.
math department head,
Emirates.
current mathematics teacher.
Can't do that
Thank
and
you.
be in the public.
All right. And we had a district grade level team meeting last week. It was our last one of the year, and the focus was on our racial equity book bundles, our social justice book bundles. And really having a conversation about how that work has gone this year and what our next step should be. And really interesting walking around from room to room, listening to the conversations and reading people's notes, a lot of agreement around the need to just kind of take it a little bit deeper, wanting to take the books and really think about where they fit in their curriculum and kind of map it out. And then also connect it to other activities and also other books that some have already found and some are looking for to bring in, and some more connecting to the history social science curriculum. And then also within that district grade level meeting, we had conversations about just the curriculum materials that we're using and did a little bit of a reaffirming of, what are our guaranteed viable instructional materials that we use with all of our students in Ross Valley. And then as we have these incredibly creative and innovative teachers, what materials are they finding that they want to kind of bring forward, share with each other, possibly run kind of a formal pilot and move forward with. So we always want to engage our teachers in our selection of what it is that we use to make instruction meaningful for our students. And I too attended the Raising an Anti-Racist, What Would You Do, that part 2 to the parent education evening, which was really wonderful. It was the first attendance, there was I think 140, and this one I think was 26. But it was a much more, I don't know if it's hands-on or face-on, just really engaging with one another in conversation. And I think a lot of really good conversation and important conversation took place. And I agree that having an in-person event would be a wonderful next step. And then of course our Parent Equity Task Force meeting met last week, where am I? And that was a great, I think that was a really productive meeting. Lots of really important conversation taking place. We have one more meeting ahead of us this year in May. And at that meeting, we're really going to be doing some thinking about any changes or refining we want to make to our REAP, to our Racial Equity Action Plan. And of course, it's so important that we get that input from this particular group that has been deep in and thinking about and talking about racial equity in Ross Valley for quite some time now. So looking forward to that. And also I'm the liaison with SURE, standing up for racial equity. And so I've been having a number of meetings with the leaders of that group and really having great conversation around what their role will be with regards to equity work in the district. And then in HR, we are in full swing. Lots and lots of interviews taking place right now. And just a huge shout out to Lori Ross, who does so much in terms of organizing and setting things up to make all of that a smooth process. We are finding that we've got a really strong and robust group of applicants for our positions, more so than in the last couple of years. Just more applicants, which is fantastic. And we're also working really hard to bring an equity lens, a stronger equity lens to our hiring process. And also we are looking forward to celebrating our staff. This week is Teacher Appreciation Week, and in 2 weeks it's Staff Classified Appreciation Week. And so we celebrate both groups next week, the week right in between the two, we at the DO.
And the school sites too.
And school sites too, thank you. And finally, been working a lot on these different mandates that have come our way. And so working on writing the TK plan, the LCAP, and then also working with all of our principals on their site plans. So that is all.
That is a lot.
Very
Excuse me.
It's very relaxing. As relaxing as listening
That's
to what
why I forgot to
your
prepare
committees
for the
are.
other item on the agenda.
No
Overachievers
worries.
over there.
All right, and then Eric, anything from Lambda Student Services?
Yeah, just briefly, I appreciate it. just in the world of special education, it's a really exciting time this spring because all children with IEPs have transition IEP meetings that where they're taking that leap from early intervention to TK or K, 5th grade to 6th, and then 8th grade to 9th. And so it's pretty incredible to sometimes have single days where, we're in an IEP for a 4.5-year-old, and then we're working with a 14-year-old, who's going off to high school. So, and that takes immense coordination and effort. And, the Whitehill team connecting with Ham District, different sites in really robust collaboration. So just kudos to all of them. And the rest of the staff extended because, of course, it's always a very multi-dimensional team. That also includes people that we bring on board from outside agencies that might provide a needed service that we don't hire from in-house. Along with the meetings we've had recently, Parent Guardian Equity Task Force and How to Raise an Anti-Racist, we have a DLAC meeting on Monday via Zoom, 6 p.m. We're gonna have an opportunity to gather, talk about, debrief the summit of LPACs that all of our English language learners took this spring, thanks to the great efforts of that team. Also talk about summer resources and get input on LPAC. We also were able to sit with our SELPA, Julia, Marcy, and I, to do some LCAP consultation. That was last week, I'm pretty sure. And that was really cool to be able to get ideas and input from our wonderful SELPA. Working with Panorama and Education, we have been able to give a survey to 70 to 80% of all 3rd through 8th graders in the district, which is really extraordinary. And so all the principals, the admin team, and then by extension the staff are going to be really digging into that, and you can anticipate here probably in late May us starting to share out some of those results. And again, the focus of the student surveys was really climate, wellness, connectedness, learning experience, and then also too questions that really are centered on acceptance and equity. So we're really excited to be looking into that, and we're developing parent surveys that we're also going to be giving, that is going to also be informing our work, and we'll be sharing out highlights with the trustees and the community. Just briefly, tomorrow right here, we're going to have a small group of our bigger MTSS design team to kind of bring together all the many threads of work that haven't just come from this year, but years past. This work didn't just start in September. It's been many years. And so really our goal is to put together what at least I'm calling, and maybe everybody else hates it, but I think it's kind of cute. It's called our playbook. And maybe that'll be voted down and that'll be controversial, but what will stand starting day one next year is a version 1.0 of all of our unified and integrated practices at academic and social emotional supports and interventions. So many things are in existence, and we need to get that focused and encapsulated in this kind of a playbook or manual. So that's going to be really exciting. And then lastly, it was really cool. We were able to utilize some of our tobacco prevention education dollars to send the Whitehill administrators and counseling team down to SoCal. They attended an AXA Equity conference. So, they're busy. They're busy over there. And we were happy to see them dedicate the time and effort to go after that. So anyway, that's a good little snapshot for now, and I will put bang the gavel for student services.
Thank you. And then in superintendent, as you might have noticed on the agenda tonight, I have brought back some articles of interest. There's knowing that there's so much information out there that is of relevance and pertinence to our school district. That I was doing this all last school year, and then this year I just haven't had the bandwidth to do it. But it's been something that I would
Super nice.
start. I love them, and I hope you all do too. I hope you have a chance. And the beautiful part about having them located here on the agenda is that it's public. It's for everybody to see. And so if it's some future date, if you want to look back at any of them, you can check them out. So I'll continue that practice as well going forward. And if you happen to come across any articles, I would love for you to share the link with me, to them with me, so that I can get them posted. So yes, all members of cabinet also know that if they come across anything, I'd love to know about it too, so we can get that shared with you all. And then other elements is like your report outs from the trustees to other members of cabinet. I too have attended the majority of all the meetings that you all attended too. Wesley, if he were here this evening, he would have done a report out from the JIPA meeting. And so I'll just let you know that's the Joint Powers Authority related to the running of the Yellow Bus program. And so just yesterday, an email was sent out to all of our Ross Valley School District White Hill parents and guardians for our current families at White Hill, our incoming 6th graders currently attending 5th grade in our school district, as well as all of our students who are either currently registered for White Hill next year or who are pending registration. So everybody who we know about at this time has received the information that the registration for the lottery opened yesterday morning at 9 a.m. and it will close on May 13th. So a full 12 days for any families who are interested in the opportunity for getting a bus pass, a yellow bus pass. That window is open. And then after May 13th, when the registration for the lottery closes, the Marin Transportation Authority, you got Transportation Authority of Marin or Marin Transportation Authority, same group, TAM or MTA, is their staff will then take a look at and conduct the lottery and then start to issue the responses back to the families to let them know that what bus passes they've received. The Hidden Valley bus, the students for the yellow bus that serves the Hidden Valley students, they don't need to do a lottery for the Hidden Valley. Those passes will simply go on sale on May 23rd. So that email is forthcoming. So related to White Hill, all 5th of our current 5th grade families should have received the email communication from Matt Catanzarite. And so that came yesterday. I believe it was approximately 9:15 in the morning. So if any of the families didn't get it, Rachel, did you by chance?
I got it, yes.
You did?
I
Okay,
did.
great.
It was earlier than that. It was
9:15.
Yeah, 9:15 a.m. Yeah.
I think it was earlier than that.
Or was it earlier?
I think it was.
Okay. Our representative, Chris Whitlock from the, no, he's with the Marin Transit. So Marin Transit. He's an employee there. He's the one who kind of oversees the implementation of the sale of the yellow bus passes. And he did send an email out on Friday afternoon to all the families who he knew of. Those were only the families who are currently have a bus pass.
Got it.
For White Hill, or who may have inquired over the year about when will the bus passes go on sale for 22-23. And so given that he sent that out, then he forwarded it to Matt, Maria, office staff at White Hill, as well as Hidden Valley, Christy Fish, and Mariposa, to let us know what was sent out. And I inquired on Sunday just about who all did this go to? Because I couldn't imagine that he would have access to every single one of our families plus our new registrants. So in learning about that, we have since come up with a new plan that he will not direct message our families when there are any communications that are going to go out that are generic in nature or that are for all families.
Mm-hmm.
And so he will first craft the message that he wants sent, send it to either Whitehill or Hidden Valley, whichever is the respective school the communication should go, and Whitehill will or Hidden Valley will send those messages out directly. That way, all families will receive the communication at the same time. And so that's just a little something that we went around and finalized today that I think will be helpful in communicating, because there is such nervousness and worry from especially the Whitehill families when there may not be enough seats for the number of families who wish to ride the bus, that when there may be a communication that goes out earlier, even though there's a window of time for families to register for the lottery, they don't know what some other folks may have received. So we just want that really clearly outlined. And the bus pass this year, 2022-23, a one-way bus pass will be $515. And so this last round that JEPA worked on was a 3-year funding cycle from Measure AA funds, the towns of San Anselmo and Fairfax that kick in some amount of money to help offset what the families have to pay out of pocket for the bus passes. This current school year, there is a lesser amount for any students who would sign up to receive the later bus pass, meaning for the bus that goes later, picks up kids later at Whitehill. And Marin Transit did a survey with all of the families who currently have bus passes and learned that that was not a deterrent or a downside. And so as part of the cost savings measure and making sure that there would be a balanced budget for the yellow bus program, the determination was made to not have a distinguishing amount, but a flat rate of $515 for a one-way pass. So that we know doubling that, if families need to get a two-way, morning and afternoon, as an example, then that would be double that price. So it's now a bus pass for the year is $1,030 for a two-way pass. And that's the same price that'll be for Hidden Valley students as well. So that's JEPA. We have some exciting time. The spring always brings exciting events at schools, and we're looking forward to the music concert. So we'll have the band and the instrumental, and then also again our 5th grade students with the opportunity to play with the and sing with our middle school students coming up at the end of May and early into June. Let's see, to add to the YES meeting, that just as of note, that although YES is 94% of their goal this year was to raise $889,000. That is still approximately $400,000 less than what they were able to raise pre-pandemic. And so the cost, that is, we've talked about in other meetings this year, in terms of what YES isn't able to fund, that is coming out of the district's general fund this school year. So hopefully they do raise and get that last 6% to at least reach their goal. And I think it is wise, as Kapir Lindheim, who is the YES treasurer, often talks about in meetings, is that with the decline of enrollment, YES has to also recalibrate its expectation of what they can raise, because with fewer families to draw from, it is only understandable that they would not be able to continue to raise the 1.2 million over the years. Even though they're going to try, they're going to do everything they can to help continue funding for the district programs of art and music, as well as their own operating programs. And they'll be, did you discuss at the meeting at all, like what the priorities will be able to be for 22-23, or is that coming at our June meeting?
I think that's coming to June.
Okay, all right. And so I too attended the Safe Routes to Schools meeting. I came in a little bit late, so Rachel, thank you for that report. And then the updates that you all gave across the room. So many folks attended the Are You Raising an Anti-Racist Part 2, as well as our Parent Guardian Equity Task Force meetings this last week. That I don't have anything to add. I think they were both fantastic and they were wonderful. And I do want to say, related to SURE, Stand Up for Racial Equity, is that it's really nice that we have that partnership with that parent group that is a subset of folks from our Parent Guardian Equity Task Force. Because I think all the work that they're going to be doing is also going to benefit all of our students and families, and branching out into the community as well. And I also really appreciated having the opportunity to meet with some of our parents who are on our Parent Guardian Equity Task Force to give input into our RVSD updates. Those are roughly our monthly district newsletter that we put out, and they helped to give some feedback for Streamline. And the feedback that I received from those 3 parents was like, yes, it was much more clear, user-friendly. The template had been improved. So thank you, Teresa and Sean, for that, because those RVSD updates is not just those of us who write the articles to contribute, but the compilation, the editing, revisions that Teresa does behind the scenes. And then, of course, once it's final, Sean's got to take the template and get it all into Parent Square for it to be ready to be able to go out. And then,
Have Teresa.
oh, Teresa's doing that too now? Yeah, look at you, math skills. All right, there we go, Teresa. Thank you again for joining the superintendent and chief business official and board for supporting us. So thank you.
Thank you.
As you do it. And so I think with that, that's about it. So thank you.
All right, wonderful. We are on to our final item, which is the meeting review. And so I guess actually I need to make sure that before we move on to that, if there's no public comment on the last agenda item. Great, now we can go on to meeting review. And this is where if there's any questions about future agenda items, as always, welcome to be in touch with Marcy or myself if there are items that you think need to be on the agenda, so that we can go ahead and put them and agendize them. We've got 2 more meetings coming up in May and then another one in June. So we've got one next week, one at the end of May, and then one in mid-June. So we got a bunch coming up here. So if there are things that come to your mind, please let us know and we can fit them in appropriately.
And just to highlight for next week's meeting, we're gonna be lucky to have a spotlight, 2 spotlights next week,
Yeah,
Brookside
back to back.
and White Hill on the same
Excellent.
agenda. And then our May 31st meeting will be Manor, and that will round out all of our spotlights on schools for the remainder of the year.
Excellent.
And then also on May 31st, our retiree recognition will be
Gosh.
coming up.
So would come
And
every week.
math.
So much
And
fun.
math, yep. A lot of fun, exciting things coming up.
Lots of stuff going on. And the end of the year. Woo. Okay. Any other questions or inputs on the meeting before we adjourn? Hearing none, seeing none. Then at 9:39, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting.